Great. Thank you for the introduction. I appreciate everybody joining us for this session today with RFID Journal to cover a few things related to the digital transformation that's happening. Very excited to talk about what's happening. Hopefully this will be a very informative session for the folks, and hopefully we can have a good session afterwards, a little bit of Q&A as well. So with that, I want to jump right in and start to talk a little bit about what's happening in the space specifically. As many of you are aware, we're living in a new era now with the digital transformation happening. And demand is coming at us from all different angles for retailers. It's coming in big waves of e-commerce specifically, and omnichannel is playing a big role in what that looks like going forward. Unfortunately, to some folks, this is looking like a dirt road, right? Some people were prepared, some people had paths, they had kind of roadmaps to what was going on. But for some folks, that is like a car with a GPS that turns you down the corner out of a dirt path if you're not ready to go at the speed of which things changed when the pandemic first hit. So the industry is going through this digital transformation very quickly and very rapidly. It's undeniable that COVID has accelerated this process, and that really retailers are being put through this digital transformation at a speed in which they did not expect. Many retailers had a vision of moving to a digital format and more digital orders over time, but sometimes those retailers are looking at volume 2-3 years out from where it actually happened. So many of them were caught off guard, and many had to struggle to figure out how to handle this global pandemic in terms of demand and the demand shifts from the consumer. Unfortunately, companies who can't keep up are going to die. History tells us that those retailers that can't evolve will have trouble keeping up. The sharp pivot that COVID caused has really been a struggle for a lot of retailers. To some folks, this volume came so fast and so hard, it was unbelievable. As I mentioned earlier, 2-3 years out, they saw it, but in terms of 2-3 months out even, many retailers did not see this. So this was a struggle for many to even just keep afloat with the demand that the retailers were seeing from the consumers. Only time will tell who will survive this digital wave and the pandemic and stay open. But those that are doing it right are doing it well, and they're going to emerge even stronger after the pandemic. One of the things that has been a challenge during the pandemic is actually the consumer being conditioned to expect fast, often free fulfillment. So everybody's been through the shopping experience of today where things can be available in a day, 2 days, 3 days at most in a lot of cases. And many times consumers want those items free. So they look to see what can I possibly get as fast as possible, who has it, where is it at, when can I get it, how much is it? They want a lot of visibility. They want a lot of transparency so they can look good on their next Zoom call, for example. To use this example, I might want to have a call later this afternoon or tomorrow, and I may want same-day delivery or next-day delivery of a new top so that I look good on my next Zoom call in front of a customer or in front of the management team. So this has created this instantaneous on-demand environment, and consumers want to buy from where they're at, what they want, from any location. So whether they're sitting on their couch, on their iPad or their iPhone or their Android device, or they're at their desk, or they're on even a laptop looking at what they want to buy. They want to have that visibility to know what you have and when they can get it. So with this came a lot of interesting things. We saw demand go up significantly. As you can imagine, these are just a couple of examples of what happened with the digital order demand during Q1, Q2 of 2020 as the pandemic hit. These volume numbers in digital orders are exponential, and they're extremely high compared to where people thought they would be. These are just a couple of things that I pulled from recent investor reports to show you. These are obviously some very well-known companies, and I'm not implying any relationship, but I just want to make sure that people get a picture of the volume demands that grew up because, through the pandemic. Because consumers do what they do when they're stuck. They consume. So they're sitting on their couch, they're watching TV, they have a little bit of money, especially with the stimulus checks that were out, and they go and they buy items that they want to get. So there was money to be spent, and consumers have idle hands, so they do what they do is they consume. These order volumes for digital went up so exponentially that retailers really struggled to service the customer. which is a big issue, especially in times of peak demand. You want to make sure that you're servicing your customer as best as you possibly can. You want to make sure that you know you can get that to the customer before you promise that to the customer. Many retailers are forced to brute force this and actually set programs up virtually overnight. Many retailers in those environments move to a delivery model, thinking, oh, I will just try to push that through my fulfillment center model, or I'll push it through some sort of distribution model. This has further exacerbated the issue. The problem is that as that has moved, we've seen carrier rates go up as demand goes up and capacity becomes less and less available. Residential deliveries have gone through the roof, and as many of you in the retail supply chain arena have probably seen, carriers have adjusted their rates, and they will be especially high during peak this year. So when you have increased deliveries plus minimum demand or minimum capacity availability, obviously that's going to drive your rates up. And most major carriers have adjusted a pretty significant peak rate. And I believe this is actually the first year that the USPS is implementing a surcharge during the holiday season for commercial deliveries, not for residential, but for commercial deliveries. The USPS is implementing a surcharge. So this is driving up the cost to serve, which is a challenge for many retailers. Keeping costs low is imperative to making sure that you have everything in line with what your expectations are from profitability. So how are retailers going to take care of this demand? What are the trends that are happening in this space? What can they do? Well, there's a couple of things that were happening prior to COVID, and most of that revolved around omnichannel. So we're seeing trends from omnichannel prior to COVID continue through the COVID situation, but almost with fuel thrown on the fire. So there's a couple of different ways that retailers are being asked to fulfill customer demand. These are just a couple outside of the traditional in-store model. So things like BOPIS, or buy online, pick up in store, ship from store, same day delivery from the store or same day delivery from a fulfillment center. Curbside pickup is another area that has grown a lot during the COVID environment. And then mobile or self shopping or touchless shopping is another area that we're starting to see a fair amount of interest go, because it creates a less friction environment and the non-touch, non-interactive experience for the consumer in the store. So we'll touch on a couple of these things, and we'll look at what are some of the things that are happening in this trend. And these are trends that are applicable not just to apparel and footwear, but also other areas, especially grocery has really dramatically changed during the time of COVID towards curbside pickup, pickup in store, and ship from store. Those things, especially on the food trend, have really been hypercharged as the pandemic has accelerated its period. So the new problem with this is that these new paths can add costs. Obviously, your prices need to be competitive, but your costs can't be out of line to serve the customer. And you want to keep your costs as low as possible to keep your margins as high as possible. These new trends related to curbside pickup, pickup in the store, or delivery to the store come with different cost factors for each one of these. Keeping those things to a minimum will be paramount to being successful, not just staying alive as a retailer, but making sure that you come out of the pandemic stronger and you have stronger loyalty from the customers that you do serve during the pandemic, because they will remember the retailers that got good service during the pandemic. And like everyone else, they'll also remember the ones that hit bumps along the road, especially the significant ones. So looking at how to maintain these new paths of delivery, these multiple omni-channel paths at the lowest possible cost, will be paramount to being successful coming through the pandemic. The other piece of the puzzle is a lot of these things, if you think about what's happening with delivery and the packages going out, will have a huge impact on the amount of packaging that will go on shipments going through traditional carrier paths. That packaging often ends up in the waste stream. So there's sustainability goals that go along with what happens here as well. You have three basic things. You have a customer that you need to satisfy, you have costs that you need to maintain, and many of us, and everyone should have, sustainability goals that don't need to be thrown out the window just to make sure that you're satisfying your customer. We all realize that in short-term periods, there are times when brute force is the proper path in order to make sure things are going. But one should always have a success path for reducing the sustainable footprint that they're leaving on the planet. And this is some of the things that we like to think about at Avery Dennison as to how we're going to help with RFID manage a lot of these things and help these retailers satisfy consumer demand with the lowest cost and the lowest sustainable footprint. So to us, when we look at what's happening in the market, we can't help but state the obvious. Bridging the gap between the physical and the physical and digital world is essential. We often talk, especially in these days, about frontline workers and essential workers in different places. This is an essential worker. Your inventory at the store is essential. It should be thought of that way. It should be another piece of the puzzle that you're constantly looking to leverage, whether or not you have physical foot traffic in the store or not. But you should think about your physical and your digital world being one and the same. We're no longer living in a single channel or even a multi-channel path where you would have e-commerce on one side and brick and mortar on the other. Everything now needs to be merged into one, and consumers are demanding that level of visibility. You need to be able to leverage that digital traffic and your physical inventory to make sure that you can fully leverage your omnichannel for things like buy online, pick up in store, curbside pickup, same day delivery. Consumers want those choices. And if you do it right, you can give the consumer a great path to keeping your costs low, keeping their satisfaction high, and minimizing your environmental footprint during the process, which is extremely key. So what are the challenges that people face with that? One of the biggest things is that inventory accuracy at the store, at the SKU level in the store, is typically not very good. Your inventory accuracy level at the SKU level, is typically about 65 to 75%. And this was validated through a study by Auburn University a couple of years back, and they found that this was pretty typical range, a few outliers above, a few outliers below. Now, this is not to say that you're missing 25 to 35% of your merchandise in terms of inventory costs. What you are seeing is a difference between what you think you have at the individual SKU level and what you actually have at the individual SKU level. So if you, for example, if you think you have 3 medium red and 3 large red, and you actually have 4 of one and 3 of the other, then your inventory accuracy level at the SKU level is actually only 50%. So these small degradations happen over time. And it is an important piece to note because that's one of the challenges that retailers have with apparel and the complexness of the SKU counts that they have. So when you think about how am I going to leverage that inventory, that comes with its own set of challenges because you can't keep track of it as often as you would like. Typically, retailers are doing inventory accuracy once, maybe twice a year through the form of a inventory audit. These audits have a tendency to have their own set of human error prone things that go into the mix as well. So they're not exactly 100%. Many times they're not even in the mid to high 90%. So what do I do when I want to leverage that inventory when my inventory accuracy is really taken, say, in January, while my inventory is at the lowest level? That's done by design, right? So I want to take inventory in January because I have very few items to count, maybe February for some retailers. I want to take that inventory, but then month over month, I see a little bit of distortion that happens in terms of that inventory accuracy. So over time, that distortion compounds itself, which is interesting because if you think about taking your inventory and doing a physical count on it in January, February, you get it pretty close to right then, but month after month, you have a small amount of distortion. And then when you get to the point where you have peak season, holiday season, you have the most amount of merchandise in your store, the time in which you want to have the most visibility you possibly can to supply the customers as best you can, that's probably when you have the least inventory accuracy and the least amount of certainty, and that is a bad thing. So what can be done about this? Well, the challenge mainly revolves around how do I manage my SKU depth? Because a lot of retailers will look and say, I know what, I will take my SKUs and I will look at the ones that I only have a 1, 2, whatever, and I'll introduce a safety stock. And that will allow me to kind of block those items that I have the onesie twosies from the consumer seeing on the web or even my internal digital order management system, so I don't send an order to a store that may get declined. That may sound good in practice, but in actuality, when you look at it from a larger picture, it doesn't solve the problem. It makes you wonder why you would even do that in the first place. Take, for example, this chart. I often think of this safety stock piece as creating what I call an inventory iceberg. So this is a representative model of an example for, let's say, a single category item. In looking in that category, let's assume that that retailer has instituted a safety stock that says, if I don't have at least 3, let's just act like it's not there and move on. Well, in today's day and age, retailers don't want to carry an absolute ton of merchandise at the store. That's inefficient. It's not very profitable, forces things into markdowns. So this is inventory that goes hidden often. If you look at this example, in this case, there would be 50% of the items would be masked from inventory just because they only have an instance of 1. So it says, I don't have 3, so let's assume I don't have it. Likewise, I've got another 30% that only has an instance of 2. So I won't reflect that either, meaning that 80% in that brick and mortar store is now completely masked from the consumer and my internal systems. So I can't leverage that inventory for things like pick up in store, ship from store, deliver from store, or same day delivery. This is significantly limiting if you think about only exposing about 20% of your SKUs to the web because you don't have a high confidence level that that 1 or 2 item is there. It's a huge problem that can be easily unlocked through the use of RFID. The challenge that stores have is they don't have a way to measure. As Peter Drucker, the well-known consultant, once said, if you can't measure it, you can't fix it. So DCs and fulfillment centers have all sorts of tools that allow them to keep track of what are they looking at for inventory accuracy. There's automation tools, there's process tools, there's assigned locations. There's all kinds of different measurement pieces that go into the logistics side of the warehouse and the fulfillment center. Those tools are often not available in the store. The store suffers from a whole different set of problems. Inventory is moved either by the associates or oftentimes by the consumers. Consumers can pick things up and put it back wherever they want to put it. They don't necessarily feel like they need to put it in the right bin location like they would at a DC as an associate. You have front and back stock. It's inside the 4 walls, but where is it at? It may be on the next table over. It may be in the back stock. It may be in an entirely different department. Consumers like to move things around, like I said. There's shrink, internal and external. There's substitution, simple substitution that happens at the register. Oh, for whatever reason, this barcode's not scanning. I grab another one that's the same price, but it's a slightly different SKU. So that creates distortion. You also have general inbound distortion that happens from the DC and the supplier, although minimal, can be significant as well at times. You have large gaps between cycle counts. So you don't have short periods in which you're re-identifying where are my gaps in terms of inventory and replenishing based on that. It's expensive to do those counts, and that's why people don't do them very often. So this is a big difference between what happened in the past where I'm handling out of e-commerce and the multi-channel environment to a true omni-channel environment that's really leveraging those stores. But to leverage those stores, you have to come up with a way to be able to identify what you have and measure it so that you're using that inventory properly across your entire enterprise. So how do you do that? Well, a lot of retailers, and it's gotten even more, have adopted RFID. RFID at the item level is truly emerged as a massive enabler for omnichannel and local inventory. Most stores, like I said, are in the 65 to 75% inventory accuracy range. RFID can help shift that inventory accuracy up into the high 90s. What this enables is better visibility at the store level and a higher level of confidence that you have what you think you have in the stores. So this means your inventory can be more accurate because you could take it more often. We're talking about tens of thousands of items being scanned in an hour. The speed at which RFID is exponential compared to single barcode scanning or especially paper and pencil in some old retailers. So this speed and this accuracy can be done once a week, once a month, depending upon what type of category you're looking at, what kind of retailer, what kind of inaccuracies you have. Now, what this creates is a level of certainty that you know what you have and you can promise that to the customer, or you can promise it to your own internal systems. The way I like to think about this is many retailers are always looking for new tools to put in their toolbox. To me, this certainty is a great tool. And there's no better tool than certainty, especially in today's COVID environment. So by connecting these two models together, digital and physical, and then you extend it one step further into the supply chain, you can really drive a truly efficient model from top to bottom across your entire enterprise. It also allows you to look at other options. So things like, how do I maximize the real estate that I have in a specific store? The old adage of stack it high, let it fly is long gone. Today, you need to be more targeted on what your merchandise assortment is to the consumer. So if you look at the image on the left, you'll see I have a couple of SKUs and I've got a large SKU depth across just those couple of SKUs because I don't have all the space and I didn't have a way to make sure that I was certain about what I had. So I limited to the number of SKUs, and everything else I listed as a maybe an online exclusive, something like that, because I didn't want to have to spread that merchandise out because I would have problems managing it. Now that you know what you have, you can increase the assortment. So now maybe instead of the specific amount of SKUs I had before, I can enlarge that SKU depth. In this case, it's showing 2 different SKUs going to 3 different SKUs. And I can manage that at a lower SKU depth because I have a greater certainty of what's there. I can get more assortment in the store, creating more options for the customers, more options for cross sales, more options of just general assortments, or maybe complete outfits for that particular consumer that's shopping in that store. Maximizing that footprint and reducing the possibility of having to source that from a fulfillment DC. This would also help a lot with split shipments. So as I manage that SKU level inventory at a very, very tight level, I have increased assortment, low SKU depth. I'm getting as many options as I can to the consumer in the store. I'm giving them a lot of flexibility of what they want to buy. I'm also have that inventory close to the consumer in my local store. So as consumers are saying, hey, I want to have that delivered, I can deliver it directly from the store, have them pick it up in the store. It's no longer an online exclusive only for a lot of items, which is a great thing because that's a big piece of what creates a lot of split shipments in the industry. Additionally, as many retailers are looking to condense that footprint even smaller into, say, urban environments. Now that may change a little bit under the current environment, but many retailers are looking for a smaller footprint environment in which they can offer still a great opportunity, a great experience for the consumer, a great assortment of what they want. They can manage that SKU depth even lower and keep that assortment high, but drive that SKU depth down and maximize that footprint. Think of it almost like tables in a restaurant. The more you can turn that product, the better. The revenue per square foot is a major driver for the retail space in the brick and mortar environment. And these are the kinds of things that retailers are looking at to better understand how do I leverage my square footage and maximize my revenue per square foot. Now that we've walked through a couple of pieces of the puzzle related to the customer satisfaction, the speed, the delivery, there's also other things to think about as well. As I mentioned earlier in the presentation, sustainability is a big piece of the puzzle that everyone needs to be thinking about. E-commerce has exacerbated this in the short term. As these digital orders flooded in, there's a lot of packaging now that's flying around in planes and trucks and delivery vehicles. A lot of that packaging, quite frankly, is ending up in the waste stream. That's not a good thing for me. It's not a good thing for you. It's definitely not a good thing for the kids and grandkids that are coming along. The e-commerce environment recognized this, and there was a recent study done that showed a couple of really interesting data points that we should all be trying to figure out how to solve. And we'll get into that in a minute with some recommendations. But e-commerce, as I mentioned, typically has more packaging involved because you're putting it in a carrier van, you're putting it on a plane, you're putting it on a truck. You need to have that protection. It's not quite the same number of amount of packaging that you would get if you, say, walked into the store and picked it up, or if you had a buy online, pick up in store, or curbside. Those experiences would be more akin to your traditional store visit. Here's your bag. Thank you for coming in. You have that option to go there. Likewise, consumers that purchase online as opposed to a more in-store visit have a tendency to purchase fewer items per transaction. Now, this becomes a problem because it actually accelerates the cost to ship, the amount of packaging per item, as well as the emissions per item that go into that. So these are some really big things that retailers need to think about. How do I solve these issues? Likewise, multi-item orders in the e-commerce world have a tendency to result in multiple deliveries. Now, this is because in today's world, not everybody is leveraging their localized footprint for the retail store environment. So that's what's driving that. There's that lack of visibility to what's available in the local store, and they're using it as a way of end up with split shipments. So if we can solve some of these problems, there's some great things that we can do. And I think RFID, leveraging that local inventory with the visibility, can help solve a lot of these problems. So what are those things that RFID helps with? Well, we already talked about RFID as a way of enabling the omnichannel. And those retailers that are effectively doing omnichannel can really take advantage of that omnichannel advantage with a couple of key things. Offering consumers multiple paths to pick up their product is paramount. If you give consumers choice, they love it, and it will benefit you in the long run because they will allow you to provide them the most logical path in many times. So things like buying online and pick up in store, if you could steer consumers toward that and give them a quality experience in that, and there are several retailers that emerged through the pandemic that are doing that very, very well. Some are not doing it as well, but I think we've seen the curbside and the pickup in store accelerate quite dramatically. This is a great scenario because it reduces the emissions related to a package shipping from a DC or fulfillment center. Typically, these types of experiences have a tendency to have more items per pickup. You have opportunities for attachment, and you're maximizing those long haul trucking environments to get the lowest amount of emissions that are there. Likewise, the in-store, as I mentioned, typically don't require all the packaging that goes into a from fulfillment or from DC shipment. For those that aren't willing to be consumers that aren't willing to go to the store, you still want to be able to manage and leverage that inventory at the local store level. Getting a shipment from across town will be a lot cheaper for you as a retailer than getting it from a fulfillment center that's across the state or even across the country in many cases for those retailers that have, say, one DC or two DCs for their e-commerce environment. Being able to leverage that inventory in the local environment will reduce the emission footprint per item to be shipped to the consumer, but it also creates customer satisfaction because you can get it there cheaper. It doesn't cost the consumer as much to buy it. Consumers that have purchases coming from a single DC retailer often will have to pay extra for expedited freight. That costs the retailer money that they had not paid in the past, so they're looking for the consumers to pay that unless they can leverage some additional basket size there, which is always a good thing as well. The third thing that's emerging, and this is relatively new, is the use of the gig economy delivery technologies. So there's several services out there that offer same-day utilization of vehicles that are in motion for other reasons. So think about things like Shipt or Uber or DoorDash. These are brands and services that are popping up to start to expand their horizons into the retail market to offer some of these third-party service delivery things across town. The third-party services can offer you the convenience of getting a same-day delivery without a big contract agreement and committed carrier services. You can reduce the packaging properly depending upon how that is going from the store to the consumer. You might not need all the packaging that you would if it was coming from the fulfillment center. And if you're leveraging vehicles that are already in market, then you can help reduce the emissions that are already in that would be required for the from DC shipments. So with that, there's always, different pieces of the puzzle that RFID can benefit from. And we've talked about a couple of things, and I focus specifically on customer satisfaction, keeping costs low for digital orders, as well as sustainability. But there was a recent report from Forbes that I think sums up a really nice set of underlying things that people often overlook one or two benefits. These are 10 benefits that retailers that are RFID enabled have over retailers that are not RFID enabled. Some of these we've talked about and it makes sense. You've got greater transparency, you've got greater customer service, you have inventory that you can see where it's at, so that with that transparency comes flexibility for you in the way that you do business and the way that you run your supply chain. So hopefully that creates leaner inventories, improved profit margins, better on-shelf availability, all these things. But in addition to those, there are some other factors that happen as well, and we see this every day. Increased customer satisfaction and reduced theft. Now the numbers in these areas vary. Shrink can go down a little bit, and again, that varies by retailer, but almost universally, retailers that have implemented RFID see customer satisfaction go up. Retailers with associates that did have RFID, often we talk to them and they say, it's so great having RFID, I can service the customer easier. I feel more confident that when it says, do you have that one? I could say, yes, we have that one, and I will go look for it. So this is a dynamic shift in the way that people are looking at employee satisfaction, and we're seeing RFID have a big impact on that piece of the puzzle as well. So oftentimes retailers ask, or even brands, what is it for me? Is RFID right for me? I want to know that the industry is doing this because I do things a little differently. And yes, different retailers do handle things slightly differently, but there's a lot of similarities across retailers. So recently, Accenture did a study of implementations of RFID, and these are just a few key stats that the research report called out that I think are fairly interesting. The ones that I want to point out specifically are on the right-hand side related to omnichannel. Many of the retailers said that RFID was a key enabler to driving omnichannel forward. 80% of the respondents said they don't think that the benefits of RFID could be replicated with other technologies, which is huge. There's a lot of other pieces of the puzzle that could be there to augment RFID, but RFID is really unique in the way that it provides non-line of sight information. Additionally, 83% of the responders had multi-channel fulfillment options. I should say 83% of the RFID adopters had omnichannel paths. So it's not just, oh, it's a digital order, it's going from the e-com. They have things like I mentioned before, buy online, ship from store, pick up in store, curbside pickup, same day delivery. These are the advantages of leveraging that inventory that you have at the local level, what I would call the forward deployed inventory, to satisfy the customer's demand and create multiple paths to get them that product. As we went through things, I talked specifically about UHF RFID, but there are other triggers that are there as well that can be used to augment the customer experience and drive increased loyalty and customer satisfaction. Things like QR codes, NFC tags can take it even further. So it's important as you look at what you want to do with your inventory, past inventory accuracy, you consider other things. And Avery Dennison is here to help you with that. We're a premier player in the UHF NFC space and basically the trigger space in general. We have really looked at intelligent labels as a way of enabling the digital order path. So with that, I would like to thank you and open up the floor for some questions.